So our next speaker is Dr. Nakedi Maputla with the Africa Wildlife Foundation, based in Nairobi. Dr. Maputla has managed very large tracts of all large landscapes, and we are really privileged to have his experience with us this afternoon. Nakedi, the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you. My name is Nakedi Maputla. I'm the Senior Conservation Scientist and Planner at the African Wildlife Foundation, and it's something that I enjoy very much. And today we're going to just to expand on what Peter shared, and we'll look at the practice of conservation planning. And later in the presentation, we'll try and marry conservation planning with the planning for management of invasive species. So if you look at the practice of conservation planning, the definition is about a process. It's a systematic process, an iterative process that requires, as Peter mentioned, all hands on deck, as many stakeholders as possible, and with the ultimate goal of protecting biodiversity and including ecological processes and also the ecological services that come along. So conservation planning is extremely important. And that's because we are losing so many species. Week in, week out, we are getting a new report saying we have lost so many species since the 70s and so on and so forth. So these are driven by things like climate change effects, people, what we do through habitat degradation and fragmentation, leading to habitat loss, habitat degradation, as well as why we are here today, including invasive species and wildlife crime. It also involves issues that we try to avoid in most cases, and that's a problem across Africa. That's including issues around mining and armed conflicts. And regardless of that, it's something that we have to do. You don't have to memorize all this, but it's important to know that conservation planning is a broad practice. It involves a lot of, depending on the objective. And for the purpose of this discussion today, we'll look at protected areas and invasive species. This is the model that we usually use at the African Wildlife Foundation. And it's about building relationships, starting with assessment of the entire continent of Africa, and then looking at landscapes that are usually under threat or with high conservation values, and deciding on whether to go to that country or not. And some of the things that guide that decision include the ability to operate in the area, political stability, and relationships with the people. We also look at, once that is done, we look at the actual landscape planning, which are usually designed in such a way that they are stakeholder-led. As Peter mentioned earlier, involving the communities. The way we design our landscape strategies is that we bring in all the stakeholders living in the landscape and other interested parties living far away, but for the most part is the inhabitants of the landscape. And what we usually do is work with everyone to come up with a shared vision for the landscape around a 10-year period. And we work together to come up with uh, the, the scope. We look at the challenges that the people face. And usually you find that what the people are facing uh, uh, usually aligns. So what is important for their well-being, what is important for their livelihoods, what is important to the health, what's important to the culture. You find that they are linked to uh, ecosystem services that you find in that landscape. And by extension, those ecosystem services are linked to the conservation targets. And when you talk about conservation targets, it could be a habitat, it could be a group of wildlife species, it could be one given wildlife species. And once we link all that, and people see that it leads to their well-being, they usually find that they come up with interesting ideas and solutions that you all put together to work towards that shared vision. And we are also really uh, focused on rights-based conservation. We value the rights to land for the local communities and the decisions that they make with their land. We believe that conservation is um, the people's choice, and it aligns with their values and cultural practices. We also look at businesses working in the area to ensure that whatever happens, the business works with the community and their practices are in line with global standards. From there, it's a usual project management cycle where we learn, we implement strategic implementation, which is a big challenge because it relies a lot on funding. But as Peter mentioned, it's not as easy as it looks. And then we reassess in the end to make sure that there is sustainability beyond the project life. So why is it important? As Johan said in the beginning, if you don't plan, you're actually setting yourself up for failure. And instead, for example, the protected areas, they are required by law. Without a plan for a protected area, you run the risk of losing that protected area to de-gazettement in certain areas. So it's a legal instrument that can safeguard an important ecosystem or an important protected area. And sometimes constraints for conservation, like they outweigh the opportunities because it's extremely expensive to develop conservation plans. And in certain areas, they just leave it out because even usually after you plan, sometimes it's difficult to implement because of the funding gaps. So this is a typical situation in a given country. We call it country X across Africa. You'd find that yeah, most of them don't really have active management plans, and that's a reality on the ground. So you'll find that it's only a few big reserves or big national parks that have active management plans. But you go to provincial reserves or county reserves, nature reserves, and so on and so forth, you find that they have little, some of them don't even have management plans. So we are slowly shifting towards invasive species. And here, this is a typical assessment tool that we use with the communities. On top here, you have the conservation targets, and this is an example from Zimbabwe, but it could be in the Tsavo, or it could be in Laikipia, or anywhere. And you see what people have selected as their conservation targets. And below, going down on this column, is the threats that they have identified. And if we zoom into the invasive species, you see, if you link it to the forest elephant, for example, they found it to be not a big threat. But when we go to freshwater species, we have a problem there. To the woodlands, there's a problem there. The Lake Kariba, it could be Lake Victoria, or it could be Lake Manyara, or Lake Naivasha. So the catchment area is highly degraded because of invasive species. In this case, it's about plant invasive species. So what are the challenges that we are facing? So usually we talk about science. We produce scientific papers, and then it becomes difficult to implement plans. That's the situation across Africa. We have the issues around conservation not being about the people. Ultimately, people choose to conserve. Us as practitioners, what we can do is advise and work with them to achieve their goals. Silos. It's important to have, if possible, communities of practice to ensure that there's information flow, information exchange, and best practices. Again, we have very weak collaboration. To add to the previous point, we have policies and laws that are fragmented, and between different sectors in government, you find that sometimes different departments have different policies that conflict with each other. And then we also have development, which is extremely important. People want jobs, countries want growth. We want to move away from poverty. There are several strategies that we can take into account, and that include planning across disciplines, engaging stakeholders early, like I mentioned earlier, integrating social and economic evidence. When we go out on a workshop to work with the communities to develop strategies, one of the things that we do is to show, because usually from village perspective, the scale is different to when we look at the landscape. And when we come with geospatial presentations that show the big picture, where the threats are, what's going on, then it starts making sense to people, and why it's important to work together. So we also have to ensure that these plans are inform policies, which will ultimately be turned into law. This is an example of a results chain. It can also be used as a theory of change, which is a series of events that are catalyzed by an activity in the beginning. For example, if we improve environmental management of an area, and we develop coordination mechanisms, we come up with criteria and then we have targeted trainings, we build capacity, we have social groups, and then the government is involved, and then ultimately and also coming up with a land use plans which will help again if we develop habitat management frameworks which include eradication of invasive alien species. Eventually, we come up with our desired goals in which biodiversity is conserved and the ecosystem services are preserved. So when we look at managing invasive species, invasive species, they are considered highly important because they rank second to habitat loss, and I think they contribute in a way. They have the ability to transform whole ecosystems. If you can see in this dam, and they have effects on human well-being, livelihoods, and they spread really fast and can be difficult to reverse sometimes, and it's very expensive to manage. Now, usually, as you saw in that cycle that I showed in the beginning, you have to assess the situation, and it's important to, while you're assessing, to look at ways to prevent the arrival of new or the spread or new how do you say this? Newcomers within the if you look at Opuntia, for example, you don't want to bring in new seeds in the area. You need to be able to detect and respond early. You have to be able to control, come up with strategies to control, as Peter showed, and also note that it's important to prevention is actually usually better than the cure itself. And sometimes the scale at which these species propagate outpace what resources that we have, and it strains the budgets. Sleeper invasions where new arrivals go unnoticed and we discover them too late. We also have, again, I did mention the costs. We need regional collaborations because they don't recognize borders as we do. So it's important to have regional plans to address them. These are some of the examples that we got from the literature. So this was in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. We had a park-wide assessment that ranked alien plants the top threat and built controls into every conservation plan. We also have to be able to constantly monitor our ecosystem so that we can detect changes. This is just an example from what we do with the African Wildlife Foundation. We are no longer active in the Mid-Zambezi Valley, but we did a lot of threat assessments with the community. And again, this is it's a blind spot that Johan mentioned in the beginning, because we did talk about the threats associated with invasive control, but we didn't have any, we came up with a plan, but we didn't find any funding to put that plan into action. And then the importance of working with communities, rangers, community rangers, and so on. Now, it's important to to work fast and early, and use lessons learned to improve how you work. We have to constantly assess, challenge our assumptions around our approaches, constantly challenge them, and think about sustainability, to make sure that there's funding and you constantly have resources to keep working. Now, if we look at protected area planning and just in the interest of time, protected area planning and invasive species management, they do complement each other, and ultimately ecological integrity will lead to improved livelihoods. If you plan together, you act together, you sustain together. And that's a very important takeaway. Again, it's important that we're able to measure success using different matrices like area under effective management. That would be around using hectareage, number of hectares where you have successfully removed invasive species and so on and so forth. There's also a growing discussion around Africa where we are talking about biodiversity economies. This is still in its infancy, but there's a lot of potential to link the control of invasive species and generate income from there, so that it's part of the circular economy. I'm going to skip this one. And again, ultimately, people have to be at the center if we are to be successful. And yeah, so finally, I think the bottom line here is that we need to strengthen capacity, invest in capacity building and shared skills across institutions. We need to develop and share practical tools. In Kenya, we have several tools that I think we borrowed from Kenya Wildlife Service, including protected area planning framework. And then we also have the community conservation planning framework that we're also using. And yeah, finally, it would be good to build a community of practice that will be that can steer this the practice of conservation planning forward. I'll stop there for now and ask if there are any questions.
I see there's a question from Stewart straight away. Stewart, I love your questions. How do conservation planners translate concepts like theory of change in ways which target audiences, e.g. pastoralists, can understand and implement their intended outcomes? That's a very good question, because we need to get from the language that we use when we write a proposal to the language that a normal person in the field will actually understand, which are actually two completely different languages. Nakedi, maybe you can just also quickly just share with us what is the theory of change.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Stuart, and for the follow-up question, Johan. So what I've realized, I think works in most cases, is that if we co-plan and co-design strategies to address challenges, most of the solutions come from the pastoralists themselves, from or the local communities, from traditional knowledge, and we usually match that with the practices from elsewhere and come up with something that is common. So that usually helps to bring everyone up to speed. And a theory of change is a set of assumptions that will lead to your desired goals. If I can give a quick example, if you want to have you toast your bread and you want it to be perfectly toasted so that butter can melt nicely on it and it can be nice and crunchy. There are certain steps that you have to do. So you have to you have to put the toaster at a certain level. That's the first assumption, that the the level is right. Next, you have to make sure that the butter is ready, and so on and so forth. The way you spread it until you get your final result, which is a nice, crunchy, uh, buttery toast. So all those linkages, activities that you do leading to what you desire in the end.
Thanks, Nakedi. That's one of the best explanations of the theory of change I've ever heard. It's basically a recipe, but you may have to make certain assumptions about your equipment that you're using. Think about it like that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nakedi. So there's another question from Peterson. Based on your field experience, which is the most common, stubborn, and widespread invasive species in your area of operations? Well, there's one for you.
Yeah, by far, it's mostly Opuntia, especially my colleagues, we talk about a lot about it, especially in the Tsavo area where we work. There is another species in the Gidebo, I forgot the name, again, highlighting the blind spot that Johan mentioned. There is a species that is affecting the Gidebo Valley ecosystem, but I forgot the name right now. Again, because we say, okay, we have to address this problem, but we hardly get an opportunity to work directly on it. It's something that we have to work on.
Yeah, I mean, these invasive plant species present themselves as very complicated problems that need really integrated approaches. That's what also makes it complicated or difficult to achieve. One last question, Nakedi. You mentioned there was one line on your PowerPoint that says plans rarely translate into action on the ground. What is the cause of that, and how do we prevent that? Because there's no point on making a plan that nobody's going to follow.
That's a very good question. I think one of the challenges is funding and prioritization. Like if a protected area manager has to decide on, like when we develop, because ideally each plan, at the beginning of the year, you have to look for ways to address all the challenges that you have. And when you come up with that operational plan, we had, and we have to prioritize. Unfortunately, some things fall by the wayside, which usually affects the implementation. And conservation plans fall usually can't compete there. And this is what I think again leads to attrition in this field, because we have people developing plans and then they don't see their plans being implemented. Again, because of the funding situation. I think the solution here would be to not to give up, but to actively look for funding, to actively implement the conservation plans that we develop.